I'm somewhat under the influence of John of the Cross's expression where he describes the passage from discursive meditation as understood in his time to contemplation. And he speaks of directing to God a general loving attentiveness. Now, attentiveness is just another noun. It means attention, isn't it, in our language? So I'm not sure what the Spanish actually is, but maybe those of you with access to the original of St. John of the Cross can help us out here. I think the distinction that I'm making is probably between attention as a particular object and attentiveness as a general loving.
Yes.
So a general loving attentiveness has a certain measure of attention, but it's not particular, and so it's open to the formless character or the undifferentiated nature of contemplative prayer.
No, I agree. I think when we speak about attention, it's an objectless attention, or the object of attention becomes decreasingly solid.
Good. Well, then that's why I suggest that we think of it in terms of a particular and general rather than intention and attention. Because I think we agree on that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Your understanding.
Oh, it's a pity.
Attention.
I was really hoping you were going to. No. But the object of, you see, I think where the object is present and it's a valid form of prayer, it's devotional prayer, in a sense it's sacramental prayer, is where you have an object of attraction. And there is a devotional, a bhakti, an eros element in that. There's an object of attraction. I'm attracted to this thing, person, whatever it is. But there's a difference, I think, as you move from an object of attraction to a center of attention. And in that process, the object becomes less and less solid. As I was saying yesterday about the mantra, it becomes finer and more subtle, and eventually, in God's own time, might lead you into pure silence. So it's Simone Weil, who I love very much. Simone Weil says, attention purifies. One of her great phrases, attention purifies. So any, you could say, act of attention or work of attention purifies the heart, and which is why this is called oratio pura, pure prayer. I think, as far as I understand the meaning of the purity of pure prayer, it means that there is no object. Because an object in some way contaminates the purity of it. Yeah?
Right. So perhaps what we mean by consent is what you mean by intention, by attention.
Attention.
Because we're consenting to whatever the content of our psychological experience is, which may be particular experiences, but there's no attachment to the particular experience of God. So the intention is towards the presence of God undifferentiated by a particular concept. So it's an effort to reduce our dependence on conceptual thinking, at least during the time of prayer. That's my understanding is part of the discipline.
Yes, I think so. And these words that we give to what are they that we're actually saying when you say intention, attention, concentration, or consent? These are in the scholastic sort of language, and these have some kind of solid choice about them. It's an exercise of the will to make them happen. And at one level, that may be true. We have to be. What's the word? We have to put ourselves in the way of their happening. But I don't think we make them happen just by an act of the will, because then that would be the ego saying, "I'm going to consent." And I don't think the ego does ever say, actually I am going to consent. And if it does, it's probably tricking you. But there is, and this is the mystery. This is the mystery. What kicks the whole thing into play? What starts the game rolling? I think it is the prayer of Christ in us, just drawing us into itself. And then, if consent happens, it happens. It's grace, but it wouldn't have happened unless we were putting ourselves in the way of it happening and persevering in, the discipline that's necessary for us to be ready, to be prepared. I mean, that's what Saint Teresa says, isn't it? All we do in prayer really is to make ourselves ready. I think that's.
I think in the with the beginner's mind, or at least in some places, you may hear that in Christian meditation, people are giving their attention to the word or to the mantra, and not really beyond that to the presence of God. But it's really a practice that starts with being attentive or placing their intention in the mantra and saying it, and therefore really becoming an exercise of the mind or the thoughts. So, I'm sure there's a nuance to that, because it seems that's not where the attentiveness is, or the intention is.
Well, that would be true if the mantra were just mechanically repeating itself at the same level.
Right.
But there's a world of difference between a mechanical repetition and a faithful repetition.
Okay.
Many of you have got up morning after morning for years and years of your lives and put breakfast on the table for your families and gone out to work and come back and made their beds and do all the mechanical things, all the repetitive things of the day. But you do it faithfully, you do it lovingly. If you did it mechanically, you'd be bored to death, and you'd run away after a while. So it's a faithful repetition. And therefore there is an organic process. Now, the question of paying attention to the presence of God, that seems to me we're doing that now because we're talking about it. It's the cataphatic approach. We're thinking, but basically in that sense we're thinking about the presence of God. I don't think it's the deepest form of attention or of being present. I would say that attention that we're speaking about is being present in the presence, to the presence, because the presence is so lovingly present to us. Who's present first? Well, God is present to us first. God loves us first, St. John says. But at that point, when that happens, no one's arguing about who loves each other first. So I think the cataphatic filter would say, I'm paying attention to the presence of God. But the apophatic filter, or the apophatic approach, would say, yeah, but that's not enough. Because I don't just want to be paying attention to the presence of God as if I'm present here and you're present there, and even if it's only a few millimeters, a few inches separate, we're still separate. What Meister Eckhart says, there is no distance between God and me. Mm-hmm. And it's maybe what St. Augustine means when he says God is closer to us than we are to ourselves. So I think there's another step in attention, which is where you are your work of attention has become so simple. I think the best word is simplicity. So simple and so silent, and silence means the absence of thought, in this case, then you are, we could say more, you're not thinking about the presence of God, but you are experiencing being present to God, as God is perhaps in a sense experiencing and being satisfied finally by our presence to God. So I think it's moving from thinking about the presence to simply, with the full force of the word simplicity there, the word simplicity, being present. Simplicity means oneness. Simplex is to be one.
So in centering prayer, when you open to the presence of God, or when you present your intention to consent and you take up the word, when you feel, when you engage your thinking, in between some of the unloading can happen, or some of the, what separates us from God, the interior disposition that we're all present to God, but there's the difference, or what prevents us from knowing that is all of that false self material. So if you're saying the mantra, does that slip out somehow in between? I mean, I understand we're talking about things that are really non-conceptual and trying to bring them to some concepts and understanding, but in centering prayer, we know these thoughts come up in a barrage and sometimes knock your socks off, and there they are, and you just have nothing more to do but just be present to whatever's happening. If you're saying something continually, perhaps these things are processed out in that practice itself without getting that kind of barrage of thoughts.
I wish. No, I don't think so. No, I don't. Otherwise, one method would be better than another. No, I think. I don't know. I think the problem of distractions are the same universally, and I think if we were a Buddhist Christian encounter, there would be a different description and analysis of it, but the experience would be the same, basically. I think what happens with the mantra, and I can only ultimately at this level you can only speak about how you see it from your own point of view. But I'm very interested in this conversation. But I think as you pay attention to the mantra continuously, and that's the difference in approach, perhaps. Continuously, you deal with the distractions, as the cloud of unknowing says, by trying to ignore them, and by simply returning your attention to listening to the word, saying the word. And then the distractions, I think, over a period of time, if you do put in the flying hours and you do really practice regularly, you'll find that the volume of the distractions and the magnitude of them will decrease over time. It's a bit like the market going up and down, but if you take the long-term view, there's an increase. You just have to hang in there and wait. Don't sell everything too quickly, or sell at the right time. But so I think you do find that the volume goes down and they become more in the background. And of course, if you're going through a very agitated or tempestuous period in your life, then emotionally and otherwise, and then out of the blue, suddenly you hit a pocket of your psychological, psychological life, which throws something up out which you don't understand why it's suddenly coming about. But the longer the practice, the more you're able to deal with that storm and not get thrown off by it or give up. And then, increasingly, I think that the continuous saying of the word does have this almost, incarnational sort of grounding of the mind and the heart. But I think, obviously that is the goal of all prayer as well, all contemplative prayer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's certainly clear that just doing meditation by itself however essential as a root or source, is not enough. We have to deal with the false self and the whatever has been buried in the unconscious in the way of emotional trauma, because it's warehoused in the body. You can even see it in massage therapy. And so grace has to deal with our wounds of a lifetime, especially the childhood wounds. And it's this silence that reduces, it seems to me, the defenses in the psyche. So it's bound to come up, the deeper rest or silence or peace you experience in the prayer. So if you have a great period of prayer, almost ecstatic, you can be sure the next period, or shortly, will be the worst one you ever had. So a positive attitude, that's what we recommend. I don't know how you do. These are not just distractions. This is the treatment for a serious disease, which is the material stuck in
it's a work.
It's the body and hindering the free flow of grace even.
Yeah. No, it's a work, and from the very earliest scriptures on meditation in the Gita or the Upanishads, that's how the silence is described as a work, and the Cloud of Unknowing says it's a work. And work is transformative. Work is the transforming of one form of energy into another, and hopefully the energy keeps on being transformed for the good of all. I think one thing that strikes me, though, and when you say it's in a context, I mean, we're here because, and all this organization that went behind this event that has brought us together, is because it's very odd, really, when you think about it, that this work of silence should bring us into community, when community then develops organization. Organizations develop in more or less complex ways, and organizations have their own ego too, which has to be constant. My hope, I mean, I'm sure our hope, is that we could show the world that in ways that maybe monasteries and used to do in the past, that there are forms of organization that can benefit its members and those who come into contact with them, which deal with the temptations of power and the divisions of the ego in a more effective way than we're used to in politics and the other institutions of the world. That there is this is what the church ultimately, we hope, is doing. Doesn't seem to be doing it very well most of the time, but it tries, it tries, and it won't be allowed to give up. But maybe within the body of Christ, the form of the church, maybe we are learning. Well, we're learning two things. One is that we have to work at trying to create the best possible forms of human life, where the ego is under control. And the other one, I think, is that something you said reminded me of it anyway, that the inner work we're doing through our personal, daily, solitary prayer is matched by our life in community. I mean, I think monks know this very well, but so do people in families. I think if you're having a spiritual life and you have children, or you have a spouse, or you have close friends, those relationships are part and parcel of the inner journey that you're making. And people often get disappointed because the other meditators or that they meet are not perfect. They forget that they're not perfect either. And the meeting of these two imperfections is challenging at times. Wonderful. There are wonderful graces with it, and gifts, and fun. But there's also, it's also a kind of a projection onto the screen of life of what is happening interiorly.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was interesting. It was fascinating to me, as these cards that I have on my lap, so many of the things that are coming out are part of what And that has an energy of its own as well. But one of the questions was, how do you envision contemplative outreach and WCCM collaborating together and not really getting into a competitive place that's so, prominent in our culture of, my method is better than yours, or our teacher is better than yours, or, that kind of thing. Or when you're in a group where there are people are praying, some people are using centering prayer and others are using Christian meditation. And, that's why I'm so happy that we're trying to get to some distinctions that are really so minimal, they're almost not worth speaking of. But there are some significant, I guess, differences. And so in collaboration with one another, both on the chapter level and the local level, and how would we begin to see ourselves maybe working in a collaborative way, and rather than in the cultural way that tends to creep into things.
It takes a conversation like this, and maybe a few more, to be at peace in certain aspects of the collaboration. For instance, I would not want to introduce training that's particular to centering prayer in a group of people who are just beginning the Christian meditation, because we haven't settled on what our terms mean yet in both. So I can't be sure that I'm not saying something that is either useless or not really an issue, or would confuse people, since just to start meditation is a big enough project. Who wants to be confused or to mingle several different methods at the same time? So there's a certain integrity to methods. There are 69 at least Buddhist forms of meditation. So we have to be able to have a few in the Christian tradition that can be, as long as they're going in the same direction, that's the main thing. And just in the experience of interreligious dialogue, we tried many times to have ritual experiences, share ritual and so on, see what that was like. But the only common ground is really silence. But it's a much better common ground than any teaching will ever be. And so to be able to meditate together without difficulty, I think, is one form of collaboration.
That should be, yes. I think
maybe to, as you were suggesting, to have some kind of courses that we could contribute to together, because the whole Christian contemplative tradition is so rich, it doesn't just include us, should be brought up to date and made available to people and through translation and courses and online things, so that we have almost a new resurgence of Christian contemplative culture that's available to folks through the web, the internet, and in certain meetings. At least those are a couple of things that I foresee.
Right.
No, I think you're right. If you look at the commercial world, when companies, corporations find themselves in competition, well, I mean, they see each other as competitive, basically, don't they? Everybody wants 100% of the market share. It's the ego. Ego wants it all. And that is 100% contradicts the teaching of Jesus on how the church should perform, which should be a transcendence of that ego desire and of any desire for power. So perhaps organizations that are operating out of spiritual energy rather than material or commercial energy are not looking either to take over the other corporation or even to merge. I mean, merging in the business world is a kind of, increasing the market share. But in our work that we share, we are a small leaven, really, aren't we, in the world. It's a huge vineyard, and I don't know, I heard somebody the other day told me that some statistic that about 1 or 2% of the population had a serious contemplative practice or awareness even. I forget what the percentage was. It was pretty small anyway. But that's 11, and Jesus never said we were going to take over the world, really. We just got to put the message out. So anyway, I agree that that focus should be upon, if the Spirit has made these our two groups grow up almost at the same time, within a couple of 100 miles of each other in Montreal and near Boston, and they had different branches, different forms, and that's eco-diversity, it seems to me. And we don't, there are enough species being exterminated and languages being eliminated in the world that we don't want to increase that. So I would say yes, that we should encourage cooperation and meditation together, maybe times of retreat together, and then concentrate on a few projects to begin with that could put out a product, something like the Roots of Christian Mysticism course that we were talking about. Mm-hmm. That would have a big impact. We could really use our different resources and different strengths for the common good, I think. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So in the spirit of that unity, without obliterating one or the other, but being really mindful of the diversity within the unity itself, and really being a symbol for that unity and diversity simultaneously, which sounds to me like what some people explain God as being, So I think that's, so thank you so much for discussing these methods, because oftentimes, in my own experience of giving workshops, people ask for those distinctions, and it's so, as we can see, it's not an easy conversation to have, particularly at an introductory workshop. But I think, like Father Thomas said, it's a good idea not to introduce both methods simultaneously, because it's just a point of confusion, but to encourage those people who have a practice to use it, but to pray together in the silence where the oneness is methodless. And that's really our intention, is to hold the intention for silence in the world, and together we can do that. Together we can join hands and hold that silence in a container of the contemplative tradition, in the roots that we share completely. So thank you very, very much for your willingness to...